Every great empire reaches a moment when confidence is tested, and the Ottoman Empire was no exception. In this episode, we enter a new era following the death of one of history's great rulers. New leaders emerge, old rivalries intensify, and the Mediterranean becomes the stage for a struggle that will shape the future of Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. We'll meet remarkable personalities, explore shifting alliances, and discover how ambition, politics, and faith combined to alter the course of history. The Ottoman Empire still stands at the height of its power, but beneath the surface, powerful forces are beginning to reshape the world. Join me as we continue the extraordinary story of one of history's great empires.
This is the History of the World podcast. Written and presented by Chris Hasler.
Suffering from dry, tired, irritated eyes? Don't let dry eyes win. Use Systane Pro. It hydrates, restores, and protects dry eyes for up to 12 hours. Systane Pro. Triple action dry eye relief.
Hello?
Look what TJ Maxx dragged in.
The Devil Wears Prada 2 is now streaming on Disney Plus and Hulu.
We are digital, we are downloadable, we are streamable.
The fashion event of the year is certified fresh.
Pull yourself together, we have work to do.
Critics say it's smart and witty and the perfect sequel.
That's all.
Get runway ready for The Devil Wears Prada 2 on Disney Plus and Hulu. Rated PG-13.
Volume 5, The Expansionist World. Episode 5, The Ottoman Empire, Part 2. Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent had died in the year 1566 and was succeeded by his son, who ruled as Selim II. The Ottoman Empire was strong, at the height of its territorial, military and economic power. However, at the end of Suleiman's reign, the Ottoman defeat when attempting to conquer Malta and either destroy or displace the Knights Hospitaller, a Christian movement who occupied the island, was a major psychological blow for the Ottomans, who would need to impose their authority once again. So a new target was set: Cyprus. Cyprus, an island in the eastern Mediterranean, was controlled by the Republic of Venice, a wealthy maritime empire. Cyprus had been held by the Venetians for almost a century, and Cyprus represented Venice's largest and richest eastern colony. Its location on the European route to the Levant made it strategically valuable. Cyprus was valuable for its cotton, sugar, and its Commandaria wine, a particular favourite of the Ottoman Sultan. Not only was Cyprus an island of value, but it was also a stopping point for Christian corsairs, known for being a pestilence to Ottoman shipping. For Selim, there were many good reasons to move in and take it. In 1570, a massive Ottoman fleet left Constantinople and landed on Cyprus's southern coast. The capital city of Nicosia fell after a siege, and most of its inhabitants were massacred. The defenders retreated to Famagusta, and the Ottomans took control of the rest of the island. The Ottomans moved in to besiege Famagusta, which bravely held out for almost a year before supplies ran out, and the impressive commander, Marco Antonio Bragadin, had to negotiate surrender. Initially promised safe passage out of Cyprus, many defenders were executed, and Bragadin himself was publicly flayed alive. This was an act that shocked Christian Europe. Pope Pius V instigated the formation of the Holy League, a coalition of Spain, Venice, Genoa, and the Knights Hospitaller on Malta, among others. The Holy League did battle with the Ottoman navy at the Battle of Lepanto in 1571 in the Gulf of Patras, part of the body of water that separates the Peloponnese from the mainland in the modern country of Greece. It turned out to be the largest naval battle in Western history since antiquity, involving more than 450 warships. The Christian victory at Lepanto was a great psychological blow. Defeated at Malta and now at Lepanto, the feared Ottoman fleet was now equalised, with many experienced Ottoman sailors lost and many Christian galley slaves freed. This was also a significant turning point for naval warfare. Galley slaves were used for rowing the galleys, but now the world was shifting towards sailing vessels. Lepanto was the last major naval battle fought primarily with galleys, as the age of the sail and cannon fire was replacing galleys and close quarters naval combat. In 1574, at the age of 50, Sultan Selim II slipped and fell on the marble floor in the bathhouse, and that was the end of him. Contemporary and later sources portrayed him as a drunk, and generally he was referred to as Selim the Sot, to reflect his drunkenness in a manner that suggests ineptitude as a sultan, although modern historians debate the extent to which this reputation was deserved. Selim had a tough act to follow, as his father was the revered Suleiman the Magnificent. Suleiman was very much a doer, somebody that would make decisions and lead from the front. Selim, on the other hand, was a delegator, but this particular fact doesn't mean that he was a bad sultan. It just meant that he did things differently, and although many were dissatisfied with the defeat at Lepanto, we should not forget that the defeat at Malta was under Selim's father, Suleiman the Magnificent. Selim II is a polarising character. History often portrays him as an ignorant sultan that inherited none of his father's merits. However, revisionists seek to correct the record and suggest that he wasn't as bad as all that. It does seem that he may have enjoyed the pleasures of alcohol and the imperial harem, but then again, that doesn't make him useless. However, Selim's mother, Hurrem Sultan, did much to transform the harem into a political institution of its own, with Selim often preferring to ask senior officials to make decisions on his behalf. His reign is seen as a turning point, where administrative authority increasingly shifted towards the Grand Viziers and palace elites, and corrupt individuals could influence their own fortunes more easily. After the death of Selim II and the accession of his son Murad III, the Ottomans recaptured Tunis, an act which helped the Ottomans move on from the setbacks of Lepanto just a few years previous. This would lead the Ottomans into an uneasy truce with the Habsburgs over who controlled what in the Mediterranean, as both sides had to respect each other's capabilities. Corruption and bribery within the bureaucracy put domestic pressure on the Ottoman Empire, with increased influence of the harem and palace officials. The maritime understanding between the Ottomans and the Habsburgs lasted throughout the 1580s, but in the 1590s the land border between these two great powers became a place of many incidents. The Ottomans looked to take advantage of these border incidents to obtain more Hungarian territory. No surprise that the Habsburgs were not going to allow this, especially as this could lead to the loss of valuable Hungarian mines. So the Habsburgs requested support from the imperial diet of the Holy Roman Empire, which was referred to as the Reichstag, and declared Turkenkrieger, that is, the legal state of war against the Ottomans. Over the course of the final years of the 16th century, the Ottomans and the Habsburgs continually captured and recaptured territories in Moldavia, Transylvania, and Wallachia during what would be known as the Long Turkish War. This only served to deplete the resources of both the Ottomans and the Habsburgs, with not a lot for either side to show for their efforts. It was an effective military stalemate. The Ottomans did score an important victory at the Battle of Mezőkeresztes in 1596, but the war continued, and the Ottomans felt the pressure of dwindling resources, internal rebellions, aggressions from Safavid Persia in the east, and financial insecurity thanks to the cost of the war and the mismanagement of finances. The Habsburgs were also financially weakened by the war, and so the Treaty of Żytwaterok in 1606 brought peace and the recognition that the Habsburg Emperor was equal to the Ottoman Sultan. Pre-war borders were largely restored. This was another psychological blow for the Ottomans. It seemed that this was a turning point from the Ottomans being the terror of Europe to now becoming just another powerful European polity. No longer would the Habsburgs have to pay tribute to the Ottomans in fear of repercussions. Generally, the nature of governance in the Ottoman Empire had changed, as the new breed of sultans preferred to remain in the relative safety of the imperial harem, where access was only granted by the Valide Sultan, that is the sultan's mother, and the Haseki Sultan, that is the chief consort. Young princes who had previously been sent to provinces to learn how to be an effective ruler were now confined to the palace, where they received little practical experience of government. This made them easy to manipulate by those who wanted the real power for themselves. Among the most influential figures were the powerful women of the imperial court. So this period of Ottoman history is also known as the Sultanate of Women, where the most important and influential females became the central political actors. The imperial harem would become a political institution in its own right. We have seen this kind of power shift a number of times in history, where the ceremonial ruler wields little or no power. The kings of Zhou in 1st millennium BCE China, the kings of the earliest Frankish states, the Abbasid caliphs, and many others are all examples of this. It's also worth mentioning the Ottoman influence on Africa. At the time, West Africa had become quite prosperous under the Songhai Empire, which had grown within and taken control of its forerunner, the Mali Empire. While the Songhai Empire was far too distant and remote for the Ottomans to consider conquering, it was important that a strong trade relationship was established between the Songhai and the Ottomans, as the Songhai benefited indirectly from Ottoman influence in North Africa, which helped maintain some of the commercial networks upon which trans-Saharan trade depended. The shared Islamic identity of the two polities created cultural connections, and there was a good degree of respect for the Ottomans in Africa. It was an independent Saadi Sultanate of Morocco which destroyed Songhai, something which would have disrupted Ottoman relationships in Africa and was likely unwelcome. The Köprülü era. If in the early 16th century the Ottoman Empire seemed like a formidable and unstoppable powerhouse, then in the early 17th century things had changed dramatically. Back in the early 16th century, a Shiite preacher called Bozoklu Celal rebelled against the state, but his revolt was small and quickly crushed. Now, almost 100 years later, There were many more provincial uprisings and large-scale bandit movements across Anatolia driven by militarization and economic hardship. The Ottomans used Celal's name as a blanket label for all of these uprisings, deeming them to be illegitimate and heretical. The Ottoman Grand Vizier, Kuyucu Murad Pasha, brutally crushed the Celali revolts, burying tens of thousands of rebels in mass pits, bringing stability to Anatolia once more. But the presence of the uprisings was indicative of the relative instability of the Ottoman Empire on a domestic level. Murad Pasha served under the Sultan Ahmed I, who died in November 1617. Due to the growth in power of the harem and the viziers, the succession was moved to a mentally unstable prince called Mustafa I. The fact that Ahmed had a perfectly viable son that the court had snubbed gave cause for rebellion, and the janissaries were at that point mainly due to their wages being overdue. Mustafa was duly deposed, and Ahmed's son, Osman II, was installed. However, Osman II began considering reforms that threatened the janissaries' privileged position, and this sparked a revolt that would lead to the janissaries storming the Blue Mosque, deposing Osman II and strangling him to death, marking the first regicide in Ottoman history. Tensions between the Ottoman Empire and Safavid Iran had existed throughout the 16th century, and significantly, the Safavids recaptured Baghdad from the Ottomans in 1624. Due to the Jalali uprisings and the Janissary revolts, the Ottomans struggled to respond, but under the rule of Sultan Murad IV, the empire recovered militarily and reconquered Baghdad in 1638. The Treaty of Zuhub permanently fixed the Ottoman-Safavid border in the following year, and after years of urban disorder, Murad banned tobacco, coffee houses and wine shops, enforcing these bans with summary executions, that is, punishment without trial. Murad's younger brother Ibrahim is remembered as one of the most unstable and disastrous Ottoman sultans. He ruled during the 1640s, drained the treasury to the point of bankruptcy through extravagance, and executed members of the court simply due to paranoia. Some put his psychological fragility down to his upbringing in confinement, something which started happening to princes after the reign of Suleiman the Magnificent and the rise of the Sultanate of Women, that is, the imperial harem. Ibrahim was deposed and killed in a coup in 1648. After decades of palace intrigue, economic collapse, and military humiliation, the Ottoman Empire had become weakened and unstable. The navy had suffered severe losses at the Dardanelles, where the Venetians were now blockading the straits and threatening Constantinople's food supply. The young Sultan Mehmed IV possessed little authority, and his mother, Turhan Sultan, struggled to control the chaos. In desperation, she turned to the most experienced and incorruptible statesman available, Köprülü Mehmed Pasha, then around 81 years old. Köprülü agreed to accept the post of Grand Vizier only on the condition that he would be granted full and unquestionable authority over the government, including the power to dismiss or execute officials as he saw fit. Such was the gravity of the crisis that Turhan Sultan accepted these terms, granting Köprülü an unprecedented degree of autonomy from the throne. Köprülü restored discipline in the army, crushed internal rebellions, rebuilt the navy, stabilised the finances, and reasserted Ottoman military power. His reforms were so successful that the Sultan appointed his son, Fazıl Ahmad Pasha, as his father's successor, and this began a dynastic line of Grand Viziers who dominated Ottoman politics for decades, the Köprülüs. Back in the 1640s, the Knights of Hospitaller Malta attacked an Ottoman convoy en route to Mecca while it sought refuge on Crete, at the time controlled by the Venetians, who referred to Crete as the Kingdom of Candia. The Ottomans accused the Venetians of collusion and used this as a pretext to declare war. This was seen by many as a convenient excuse for imperial expansion and a play for domination of maritime routes. The siege of Heraklion, the capital city also known as Candia, lasted right through until the Koprulu era. It would be the Grand Vizier Fazıl Ahmad Pasha that led the campaign which saw the eventual fall of Candia in 1669 after 22 years under siege, bringing the island of Crete under Ottoman rule. Despite the fact that a Habsburg-led coalition defeated the Ottomans at the Battle of Gotthard in 1664, there was a newfound recognition of the Ottoman threat which drove the Holy Roman Emperor Leopold I to quickly secure a peace treaty with them. They knew that if they couldn't strike a deal with the Ottomans, that they may keep coming, and they could do without that pressure, with Louis XIV of France threatening them from the west. So the Habsburgs chose to preserve and confirm Ottoman influence and control of the areas in Eastern Europe in return for a 20-year truce, something many, especially in Hungary, felt a great disappointment in. It has been referred to as the shameful peace. During this period of supposed peace, the Ottomans focused on building their military strength, and with a new Grand Vizier appointed in 1676 called Kara Mustafa Pasha, there was an impatience for the 20-year truce to expire. Pressure was increased along the Habsburg frontier, and troops and supplies were gathered in preparation for a major campaign. Even before becoming the Grand Vizier, Kara Mustafa Pasha was instrumental in the acquisition of Podolia province and the land called Right Back Ukraine from Poland. Conflicts with the Russians ended somewhat in an effective stalemate. Even with Safavid threats from the east, the ambitions of Kara Mustafa were too much, as he would prepare to capture Vienna, the capital of the Habsburg monarchy. Capture of the city would represent the triumphant culmination of the Koprulu revival. A huge Ottoman army began advancing from Edirne through Hungary in 1683, supported by various allies and auxiliaries. The advance was so successful and so alarming that Leopold I fled Vienna, leaving it to defend itself. By July, the Ottomans had surrounded the city and began digging trenches, positioning artillery, and started mining beneath the city walls. Around 15,000 defenders, commanded by the Austrian general Ernst Rüdiger von Starhemberg, were defending the city. It seems that the Ottoman forces were perhaps 6 to 10 times larger. The defenders were under constant pressure, digging counter-tunnels to head off the Ottoman tunnels in which explosives were being planted and continuously repairing walls. In the city, food ran short, disease spread, and casualties mounted. By September, Vienna was on the brink of collapse. It was thanks to a coalition force of tens of thousands being led by King John III Sobieski of Poland on the 12th of September 1683 that Vienna did not collapse. The coalition arrived in the hills overlooking Vienna before gradually advancing downhill in order to do battle with the Ottomans. 18,000 horsemen thundered down the hills in what remains widely considered as the largest cavalry charge in history. The Ottoman army, exhausted from 2 months of siege work, broke into a total disorganized rout. Kara Mustafa Pasha fled, leaving behind his personal treasures and the Sultan's holy standard. This catastrophic defeat can be seen as a turning point in the conflict between the Ottoman Empire and Christian Europe, and one for which Kara Mustafa was executed for in Belgrade. A broad anti-Ottoman coalition called the Holy League was formed in 1684, consisting of the Holy Roman Empire, Poland-Lithuania, Venice, and later Russia. After the execution of Kara Mustafa Pasha, instability hit the Ottoman Empire. Military exhaustion and financial strain led to a decline in morale. The Habsburgs advanced into Hungary, capturing Buda back from the Ottomans, and then further Hungarian strongholds falling in turn. In 1526, Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent annihilated a Hungarian army at Mohacs. Just over a century and a half later, the Habsburgs smashed the Ottoman army at Mohacs in a symbolic revenge. The defeat caused political instability within the Ottoman Empire. The Republic of Venice advanced in the Mediterranean, challenging Ottoman naval control. The Venetians even bombarded the Parthenon in Athens, which was being used as an Ottoman powder magazine, in other words, a storage for explosives. The growing strength of Habsburg Austria forced the Ottomans to sign the humiliating Treaty of Karlowitz in 1699. Most of Hungary was given to the Habsburgs, and further territories to the Venetians and the Polish. Never before had the Ottomans been forced into a position of surrendering such large amounts of territory. The period from Vienna to Karlowitz is historically referred to as the Great Turkish War. The Ottomans entered the 18th century quickly realising the need for reform. Local power holders in the Ottoman Empire threatened to become too strong, so the need for reliable centralisation of the empire was necessary. Rebuilding Ottoman military to be in a position to prevent Habsburg liberties on their borders was also a priority. Karlowitz had forced the Ottomans to reassess its standing and attitude in a modernising Europe. Ottoman aggression was no longer an asset, and a mature attitude to fixing imperial problems was now required. In 1716, the Ottomans declared war on Austria, hoping to avenge the Treaty of Karlowitz and reverse their earlier losses. It would be Prince Eugene of Savoy, a celebrated military field marshal in the service of the Holy Roman Empire, who would become a thorn in the side of the Ottomans again during this period. Eugene had distinguished himself as a young man at the Siege of Vienna and played a major role in the entire Great Turkish War, which closed out the 17th century. He was called on to lead a Habsburg army in 1717 during this new Austro-Turkish War. Eugene's forces captured Belgrade after a decisive victory over the Ottomans, gaining control of the Danube region. More substantial territory losses followed. The Tulip Age. The Treaty of Constantinople in 1700 formally recognised the Ottoman loss of Azov to Russia. This meant that Russia now had access to the Black Sea via the Don River, which had been in Ottoman hands since the 15th century. This enabled Russia to build a fleet and become involved in the politics of the Mediterranean and its tributaries. This was off the back of the Treaty of Karlowitz just the year before. This dreadful sequence of events contributed to a military revolt by the Janissaries, which resulted in the abdication of Sultan Mustafa II in favour of his brother Ahmed III. Ahmed was a major part of the diplomatic reforms of the Ottoman Empire that were mentioned earlier. The man responsible for the Russian successes and the creation of the Russian Navy was Peter the Great, initially the Tsar and later the Emperor. Peter was attempting to turn Russia into a major European power in its own right, much as the Ottomans had done. But in doing so, he would create a lot of enemies, especially the Swedish. When Peter crushed Charles XII of Sweden at Poltava in 1709, Charles fled to Ottoman territory. Peter demanded Ahmed hand over Charles, but Ahmed refused. So Russia and the Ottoman Empire went to war again in 1710. Peter the Great invaded Moldavia, expecting Christian allies to join him, but they didn't. In fact, Constantine Brâncoveanu, the Prince of Wallachia, played a cautious double game. Rather than openly backing Russia as expected, he withdrew his secret support and resupplied the Ottoman forces when he realised Tsar Peter was marching into a trap, leaving the Russians stranded without food, water or cavalry. Azov was returned to Ottoman possession. Despite this success in the Black Sea region, as we already learned, it would only be a few years later that the Ottomans suffered a crushing blow of losing Belgrade to the Habsburgs in 1717. The resulting Treaty of Passarowitz ceded many territories to Austria, dramatically expanding Habsburg control deep into the Balkans. But the treaty also recognised recent victories that the Ottomans had had against the Venetians, so also formally ratified the movement of Venetian territories on the Peloponnese and on Crete over to Ottoman control. Again, the Ottomans had to appreciate their vulnerabilities may not outweigh their strengths, and a renewed period of realisation had to happen, with the Habsburgs now perilously close to their heartlands. This period of sober Ottoman reform is known to history as the Tulip Age. Sultan Ahmed III had already attempted to change the diplomatic direction of the Ottoman Empire, and he was obsessed with tulips, hence the reason we call this period the Tulip Age. The popularity of the tulip hit an all-time high, as the flower became a symbol of identity and cultural strength. We can still see the legacy of this period in the modern International Tulip Festival held annually in Istanbul, formerly Constantinople. It was a period of urban beautification, with the construction of gardens, fountains and pavilions. The first state-approved printing press was introduced, enabling the printing of scientific, historical and geographical works, signalling a major intellectual shift. Diplomats were sent to Paris, Vienna and Warsaw, and they brought back educational information which enabled the Ottoman Empire to modernise. Not everybody was welcoming of the reforms, however. For some, the importing of European ideas was seen as a threat to traditional Islamic scholarship. The Janissaries were under threat of becoming an outdated military concept and resented being neglected in favour of new Western-trained military units. The taxation of the population contributed to a lavish lifestyle for the elite, and this caused inflation and food shortages as extravagance and corruption increased. The military campaign against Safavid Persia experienced delayed decision-making, which was seen by a contingent as hoarding tax money meant for the campaign, while soldiers died unnecessarily. A rebel named Patrona Halil, a former janissary of Albanian origin, led a mass uprising in Constantinople in 1730. After Friday prayers, Halil and a small band marched through the streets of Constantinople calling for justice. Thousands joined the march, which eventually resulted in an attack on Topkapi Palace, the centre of the Ottoman government. Sultan Ahmed III was forced to abdicate and would be returned to the prison which young princes had been kept in since the early 17th century, since the rise of the Sultanate of Women and the Grand Viziers. These prisons, called cafes, were created to prevent fratricide, but it was a convenient way to prevent young princes being posted to provinces to become independent and influential. Massacre, arson, and looting swept through Constantinople. Mansions were sacked, tulip gardens destroyed. The Grand Vizier, Nevşehirli Damat Ibrahim Pasha, seen as central to the lack of military spending, was strangled. Ahmed's nephew, Mahmud I, was installed as the new sultan. Patrona Halil saw himself as somebody who would be the acting ruler of Constantinople, though, and demanded that Mahmud declare war on Russia. Russia was a rapidly modernising empire encroaching on Ottoman territory from the north, which Halil perceived as a threat. The Sultan and his advisers feared another costly war and saw Halil as a destabilising influence. Sultan Mahmud I and his closest advisers invited Patrona Halil to Topkapı Palace under the pretext of receiving an imperial honour. When he arrived, he was seized and strangled with a bowstring in front of the Sultan, an execution in the style of that reserved for high-ranking individuals. The danger of such an act could provoke another uprising, so the royal court took prompt action to capture and execute thousands of Halil's supporters. The Tulip Age had ended, and the resulting rebellion was crushed. Palace control was restored. The Ottomans recognised in 1730 that they were not yet capable of matching Russia's growing military strength, though they likely understood that renewed conflict was only a matter of time. In St. Petersburg, Empress Anna Ioannovna continued Peter the Great's long-standing ambition to regain Azov and secure access to the warm waters of the Black Sea. Russia opened the war in 1736 by invading Crimea and recapturing Azov, but the campaign proved costly. Slow supply lines, disease, and logistical failures killed many thousands of Russian troops. The fighting along the Russo-Ottoman frontier soon settled into a stalemate. Sensing an opportunity, while the Ottomans were preoccupied with Russia, the Habsburg monarchy entered the conflict in 1737, and Austrian forces captured the Serbian city of Niš. However, the Austrian army was poorly prepared, and the Ottomans not only defeated them and retook Niš, but also launched a counter-offensive that recovered several Austrian-held fortresses in Serbia and the Banat. Despite the fact that the Ottomans had experienced much turmoil in recent decades with its economy and stability, it had still not only resisted the advances, but also pushed back. The Ottomans defeated the Austrians and even went so far as to recapture Belgrade, which had been lost some 20 years before. Even though the Ottomans had lost somewhat to the Russians, they still limited their losses. Under the circumstances, this has been seen as a form of moral victory for the Ottomans, who surely could not have expected to resist simultaneous attacks from both Russia and Austria. The resulting treaties, firstly at Belgrade, ceded substantial territory to the Ottomans, and secondly at Niš allowed the Russians to keep Azov only. We will continue the Ottoman story in Volume 6.
Hello?
Look what TJ Maxx dragged in.
The Devil Wears Prada 2 is now streaming on Disney Plus and Hulu.
We are digital, we are downloadable, we are streamable.
The fashion event of the year is certified fresh.
Pull yourself together. We have work to do.
Critics say it's smart and witty and the perfect sequel.
That's all.
Get runway ready for The Devil Wears Prada 2 on Disney Plus and Hulu. Rated PG-13.
Your team just added its 67th AI tool and also your 67th security blind spot. The good news? The Vanta agent works like a GRC engineer in the background, finding every app your team uses, scoring the risk, and drafting fixes for you. Vanta is the platform used by over 16,000 fast-moving companies like Ramp, Cursor, and Harvey, who are shaping the future with AI and staying ahead of AI risk. Get started at Vanta.com.
Thank you very much for listening to this, the second part of our two-part series about the Ottoman Empire during this age. And I find it fascinating looking at empires of this magnitude and seeing how their characters change so dramatically by the centuries. It becomes unrecognisable over the centuries compared to how it originated. So it's really interesting to see that story play out. And thank you very much for listening and joining me on this journey. Now, to all of you listening, all of you loyal listeners who I'm very grateful for, please don't forget to support and listen to the new History of the World podcast called History of the World Podcast Timelines. You can find it everywhere where you would listen to this podcast. And we're currently tracking the history of the presidents of the United States of America, one by one in sort of 15 to 20 minute bite-sized episodes. And it's really fascinating. I've always been fascinated by the history of the American presidency and America itself. And this really is a great illustration as to what was happening and how the role of the US president developed over the years. So please do come and listen to that podcast. It's called History of the World Podcast Timelines, and you can find it everywhere where you listen to your favourite podcasts. Now, as ever, we always ask that you support the podcast in any way that you can, even if it's just telling a friend. But the most effective way to support the podcast is by financially contributing, and any voluntary financial contributions really do help the podcast, and it helps me to invest in further projects and more time into this, more time and energy into this project. So if you'd like to do that, please go to the website, historyoftheworldpodcast.com. Have a little click around while you're there, of course. But essentially click on the Patreon link and sign up to make a monthly contribution. When you do that, you will become a lifelong member of the History of the World podcast Illuminati. And we have two new members to welcome this week. We've got Dan and we've got Steve Mitchell. So thank you so much for helping with the project and keeping it going. And we really do appreciate everyone's efforts to keep this project going. And we, there's no reason why we can't reach the end of this, why we can't get to the end of Volume 7. And Volume 7 is going to be a beast, I can tell you. So we're going to have to put plenty of work into that one. But nonetheless, your help is invaluable. So appreciate everything that you do for the podcast. Likewise, I'm incredibly grateful when you drop me a line, when you write me a message. That really does, that's very personally gratifying for me to receive your messages. So if any of you ever want to write to me, please feel free. And the most effective method for doing that will be to drop me a line via email, and the email address is historyoftheworldpodcast@mail.com. That's MAIL. And if you're struggling with that one, just go to the website and there's a contact us section there that you can get straight in touch with us. But we always like to read out some of the messages. A lot of the messages that I'm sent are absolutely fascinating, and they're well worthy of the time that we take to read them out and maybe discuss the content. So let's have a look and see some of the more recent messages that we've received here at the podcast. We received a message from John. John has put, "Hi Chris, I love this podcast. Thank you. Can't really add to all the positive comments you've received to date, as you're doing a brilliant job. I only discovered the podcast in February 2026, and I'm halfway through volume 3. The only comment which may help is when people send through negative comments, don't dwell on them. I was a university lecturer and I'd get 98% positive feedback, but there was one or two that would really cut me up. It seems to be human nature to punish ourselves. Please don't. The work and commitment you've shown is outstanding. Thank you. Well, look, John, thank you so much. And it's very kind of you to consider my feelings in that manner. I'll be honest with you, I'm quite a resilient guy, you know. I tend to believe in what I do. And you know, there's enough people out there that really do appreciate what we're doing. And one of the reasons I started doing this is because I wanted there to be something out there that did exactly this, that told a chronological timeline of the history of the world in podcast format. Now, just recently, I found a way in which to upload the entire back catalogue of the history of the world podcast onto YouTube. And although it doesn't create any kind of video, it does upload it in a form that you can actually watch it as a video. You just get a thumbnail of the logo as the video, but essentially everything now is on YouTube. And I remember I worked quite closely with a gentleman called Nick Barksdale, who founded the YouTube page, The Study of Antiquity and the Middle Ages. And he was quite a talented video maker. And he took some of the History of the World podcast work and turned it into video formats whereby you can actually watch it with some very vivid and stunning imagery, like library pictures that would accompany the podcast episode. But of course, this attracted a lot of people to watch the videos. But it's you get quite a diverse array of people watching videos on YouTube, and I found that there are many people that want to make negative comments for the sake of making negative comments. Some people make negative comments that were quite constructive. So my feedback to that would be that I welcome negative comments, because the ones that are worth reading do probably do the most in terms of making me reflect on the work that I'm doing and the quality of the work that I'm doing, and how I can improve the quality of the work that I'm doing. So I think, you know, you have to take negative comments for what they are. And some people do make them for the sake of negativity. I don't know why, but some people just really, you know, maybe want to bring others down. Otherwise, some of the negative comments are actually constructive, and you can get more from them than you can from most comments in terms of wanting to improve the work that you're doing. So, but thank you, John. You're absolutely right. You should never get emotionally het up over negative comments. You should just continue what you're doing and listen to the majority. So, wise words, John. Thank you very much. The next message is from Michael James Ellis Bennett, who's put, just to catch up. As promised, I've joined the Illuminati and cannot wait to hear you read my first message to you in which I said I would financially contribute. I'm on Volume 4, Episode 70, after being on catch-up for the past 4 years. So I don't know if you've read my first message on the podcast or not. To repeat, I wanted to hear an episode on an alternative timeline where the Axis powers won the war and what would happen after their victory in the following years, and how the world would be different today under Nazi rule. I think you should do a few more alternate history timelines, maybe if the Roman Empire declined a lot later than it did, and so the advancement of technology making our world more advanced. Anyway, keep up the good work, and I promise if you read my message in the podcast, I'll buy you a book on the Third Reich to see, so you can see what did happen as opposed to the alternate history I'm asking for. Thank you, Michael James Ellis Bennett. Michael, you sound like a very generous gentleman, and I think more than anything, I have to give you a very heartfelt, warm thank you for your support of the podcast, and I really do appreciate it. At the moment, History of the World podcast, as mentioned before, has got 2 projects on the go at the moment. We've got the History of the World podcast and the History of the World podcast timelines. And both of those projects are very time consuming. And I would love to do something like an alternate timeline thing. And I know this thing has been explored by other authors and things like that. But also, one of the things, if someone said to me, what would have happened, for example, if JFK hadn't been assassinated, for example, probably one of the best things to do, and this is something I do in terms of writing the podcast, I triangulate a lot of information using about 4 or 5 different AI platforms, where one of the things you could do is actually to type into these AI engines what would have happened if JFK had not been assassinated, and you will probably get some very interesting answers from that will get your grey matter in action, get you considering. And I also believe that you would probably get alternate answers based on the AI engine's pattern formulation. So maybe that's a way to maybe consider possibilities in terms of alternate timelines. But as I say, it's something I would love to do, but at the moment, a lot of energy has to go into this podcast and the sister podcast. So at the moment, I don't think it's on the horizon, but maybe if down the line, if life permits, maybe I could do something like that. But who knows? But thank you very much for such a wonderful suggestion. Anyway, that's it for this particular episode. Is about the Battle of Lepanto, this really crunch naval conflict between the Ottoman Empire and the European Holy League. And it's going to be a wonderful story. It's got echoes of the Battle of Actium between Octavian and Mark Antony and Cleopatra, and more for the geographical location and the gravity of the actual battle and the potential of the result. It's a wonderful battle. It's one of those what if moments that would get Michael's juices flowing. What if Antony and Cleopatra had won the Battle of Actium? And we could say this about the Battle of Lepanto. What if the outcome was different? What would have happened? So look forward to that. And also, as a footnote to the episode, don't forget to look out for the re-recordings of the older episodes. We're currently re-recording the oldest episodes. We've done Volume 1, Episode 1 and Episode 2. You can also find the new uploads on YouTube, and there is an accurate subtitles for it. So a lot of the podcasts episodes that you see now on Spotify and YouTube will have auto-generated subtitles, and as we know, that it doesn't always give you an accurate portrayal of the words being spoken. But the new re-recordings of the oldest episodes will have accurate subtitles based on the transcripts that have made for the episodes. So for those of you that I know, 1 or 2 of you have mentioned that you would love that. So hopefully that will be something that 1 or 2 of you do look forward to. Anyway, that's it for this week. Until next time, thank you very much for listening. And as ever, don't forget to be good.
Hello.
Look what TJ Maxx dragged in.
The Devil Wears Prada 2 is now streaming on Disney Plus and Hulu.
We are digital, we are downloadable, we are streamable.
The fashion event of the year is certified fresh.
Pull yourself together. We have work to do.
Critics say it's smart and witty and the perfect sequel.
That's all.
Get runway ready for The Devil Wears Prada 2 on Disney Plus and Hulu. Rated PG-13.
Are you enjoying the History of the World podcast? If so, visit historyoftheworldpodcast.com, click on the Patreon link, and sign up to make a monthly contribution. Follow the History of the World podcast on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, X, Threads, Tumblr, and Mastodon. And don't forget to look out for our sister podcast, History of the World Podcast Timelines. Thanks for listening.